how they hold up against the sun, the sand, and the little critters that roam about here. What they do is they put a black latex spray paint over the canopies, the radomes, and all the openings there, and then of course they have to put a white reflective coating on that to reflect the sun. If you just had that black coating, temperatures in those cockpits would get up to 200 degrees. This keeps it pretty cool within about 15 degrees of outside temperature. This first row has a much longer canopy on it. That's the B model. That's the two-place training version of it. The F-16 is a very popular airplane, developed in the late 1970s. Air Force was buying the F-15, but they wanted a smaller, cheaper, single-engine, very agile dogfighting airplane. See 5 in this first row that bear the markings of the Royal Norwegian Air Force. They bought a newer version, the J model, and these still have about 8,000 hours of flying time on the wing structure in there, so they're hoping they can find a worldwide customer to buy that airplane. Over on the left, you'll see the wing sections of the A-10 aircraft. They're awaiting that modification. There's the center section with the fuel and the outboard sections. It takes up to 10 to 12,000 man-hours to go in, strengthen the structure, clean out, reseal the fuel tanks, put new electronics and hydraulics and a bunch of other mods in there. Those white pylons, they go under the wing of the B-52 bomber. Each one of those pylons can hold 6 long-range cruise missiles. So they'll put one under each wing for a total of 12, plus the bomber can carry 8 more of those cruise missiles in the bomb bay and a big rotary launcher. So it gives that old B-52 quite a long-range attack capability. Now I say old B-52. The newest versions that are flying just this year hit their 50th anniversary in service. So older by far than the crews who are flying them. So it's a good testimony to a good design. You know, airplanes, like people, aren't designed to last forever. They do wear out just like we do. There'll be cracks in the metal and the metal will lose its strength. And so they have a lifetime. There's about 60-some airplanes here. We'll talk a little bit about each one, starting with this first one on the left, the OV-1 Mohawk. This was built by the Bell Company for the U.S. Army as an observation aircraft. Later they used it in Vietnam as a electronic reconnaissance airplane. They would put a great big side-looking radar along the side of the fuselage. Various museums around the country. Over on the right is, with the blue tail, is the S-3V Viking, built by Lockheed for the U.S. Navy. Radar that could spot him if he was on the surface. It has listening devices for any radar or radio frequencies. Then they drop into the water sonobuoys, which listen for the sound of the sub, which travels tremendous distance under the waters. And they can figure out where that sound's coming from, and then they'll fly low over the water with a boom out the back end that measures variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by a big metal object under the water, and that's how they find them. Next airplane is a nice front view of the F-14D Tomcat. For about 33 years, this was the Navy's principal fighter interceptor aboard the aircraft carrier. 2 big powerful engines, had a crew of 2, a great big radar, 36-inch wide radar antenna in there, very powerful. Swing wing airplanes, the wings are out for takeoff and landing. Back it can go real fast. Could carry a bunch of missiles. They had a missile in there called the Phoenix. It could actually go out and attack a target almost 100 miles away. All have been retired from the carrier service right now. As I said, the only other couple in existence that are operational might be in Iran right now. The 2 main rotors on it, so it doesn't have to have that separate tail rotor to keep it going straight in the air. Next 3 helicopters are built by the Bell Company. This first one goes way back to the 1950s. It came off the production line at the time where it was called a utility helicopter, or an HU. The real name is Iroquois, but that HU gave it the nickname everybody knows it as, is the Huey. 18,000 have been built worldwide, some still in service. U.S. Air Force and the Marines still fly versions of this thing. It's an airborne early warning aircraft. That big thing on the top is a rotating radar antenna. And this guy's job would be to take off, fly high above the fleet, greatly extending the radar coverage because of that increased altitude. He could track 600 individual air targets, relay all that information back to the command center. Now, there's always funny stories that get attached to aircraft, and I'll tell you one about this guy. Seems when one of these was first flying in the U.S. on our west coast, one was taken off from Moffett Fields, south of San Francisco. A motorist driving along the adjacent interstate sees this thing go in the air, pulls over to the side of the road at one of those emergency telephones to report that a UFO was stealing one of the Navy airplanes. It looks like it, and folks, they swear that actually happened. This is an interesting aircraft, the YC-14. The Y designation means it was a prototype, C for cargo. One of two built by the Boeing company in the 1970s. The Air Force had a competition to see if they could come up with an all-jet powered transport to replace that C-130 we saw. Well, it turns out it didn't do all that much better. There was cost an awful lot more. There were a lot of cost restraints, budget cuts in the early 80s, so it never went into production. Those big things hanging down from the wing, those are hinges so the flaps can go way down low and actually allow it to tank off and land at about 100 knots. In fact, the exhaust from the engine goes right over the top of the wing, which will help create lift. It was in the mid-50s for the U.S. Navy as a subsonic carrier-based attack airplane. The Navy, for their attack aircraft, never thought they had to go real fast. In fact, the slower you go, the closer to the ground you can get to release your weapons, the more accurate it can be. So it was a pretty good concept. Very agile, very maneuverable airplane. Pilots love to fly it. Carrier-based attack airplane. This is the A6 Intruder. Now this is a bigger one than the A4, as you can see. Has two engines, has two crew members sitting side by side. That big thing sticking up above the cockpit is the air refueling receptacle. This airplane was the first airplane built that could carry its own empty weight in bombs. Huge carrying capability. 4 pylons on the wing, 1 under the fuselage there, and I've seen models where they had them 6 bombs on each of those stations. So if you saw the movie Flight of the Intruder, this was the aircraft featured there, designed to fly at low altitude in bad weather underneath the radar and missile coverage. The F-18B, the B is the 2-place model. You can see the canopy is much larger, and this airplane actually was the number 7 aircraft flown by the Navy aerial demonstration team, the Blue Angels. Very versatile airframe. They call them FA-18s right now because they're equally adept at the fighter, the air-to-air role, or the attack, the air-to-ground attack role. It was the first airplane that had a really functioning head-up display, or HUD. Folks, that's where all of the flight, the navigation, the bombing, the attack information is all symbolically presented on this big gun sight for the pilot, so he gets all that data without having to look in the cockpit. Boeing YC-14. Again, they didn't go into production, but what McDonnell Douglas did do is they expanded this about 35% bigger. It could carry twice the takeoff gross weight, sold it to the Air Force as the C-17, and it is production today. The Boeing company didn't make out too bad on the deal because they bought McDonnell Douglas, so now it's the Boeing C-17. Look at this F-15 Eagle. In Vietnam, we found out that our F-4s and F-105s were nowhere near as maneuverable as the smaller MiGs. So the Air Force in the late 60s wanted to come up with a good air superiority fighter, selected McDonnell Douglas to build this thing. 2 powerful engines, more thrust than weight, it can accelerate as it climbs out. Big wing for high altitude performance, a great radar, the first radar that was really could be functioned by one person, just the pilot, other than the F-4 that took 2 or the F-14 that took 2 people to run it. Over the years, F-15s have been in actual combat and have racked up 104 kills without a single loss in air-to-air combat. Pretty good record. Airplane's old, however. And about 3 years ago, this time in Missouri, there was an Air National Guard one flying a practice dogfighting mission, and the whole nose of the airplane broke off with the pilot in it. He was able to eject, not too much damage. They had some structural issues with the airplane. Again, they don't fly forever. They were grounded for a while. They got them back in the air now. Being replaced by the F-22, which is, I guarantee you, an order of magnitude better than this guy. Again, a 1950s, the first of the Century series, or the 100 series fighters that the Air Force bought. This one, during the Cold War days, we set nuke alert in it. Didn't have any navigation aids other than a map, your clock, your compass, and your airspeed indicator and your eyeballs. Vietnam, they used it for close air support of the ground forces. This is a two-place version. The F model is about 3 feet longer. Now notice the orange on the tails, on the wingtips. They were using this particular airplane as a unmanned target drone for missile training. But when they get down to only a couple of the airplanes left, they stopped using them and replaced it with another airplane. So this guy survived its watery grave. Missions there. We closed Panama, they retired him. It didn't take too long. State Department brought 8 of the 10 back into service in the counter-drug program. Air Force right now is buying 38 more of these for the Air National Guard. Again, much improved. The C-27J with the bigger engines, composite propellers, again, carries more further, higher, faster, with less fuel. The B-36, and later used by both the U.S. and Canada to protect the North American continent from the perceived Soviet bombers coming over the North Pole. Very fast airplane, 2 engines, set a bunch of speed records in the 50s. As an interceptor, had a radar in it, of course, a radar observer in the back seat, carried its missiles in bays underneath the belly, could also carry 2 unguided rockets. Now, what good would an unguided rocket do against a bunch of bombers? Well, they calculated if they put a tiny little nuclear warhead in the nose of this thing and then launched it off amongst the bomber fleet and set it off, it was going to give them some grief. They actually had a test program where they launched one and it exploded, but we never had to do it for real, thank goodness. Next airplane on the left is the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter built by Lockheed in their famous Skunk Works. Folks, you have to have special stealth glasses like I do to see it, or a great imagination. We were hoping to get the airplane here to go along with those 3 wheels at one time. Actually, we wanted to get that boarding ladder kind of stuck in the ground like that. Well, Lockheed has retired all of their Nighthawks, but I think quite wisely they decided to store them all up at Tonopah Test Range in the desert north of Las Vegas, where for years they were secretly based, and each one has its own individual hangar there. We had a meeting with the center commander this summer, and he took us around, and one of the comments he made was that all airplanes eventually end up here, so we might actually get one of them one day. All right, now let's take a look at the C-130 over on the right here. This is a DC-130 flown by both the Navy and the Air Force. The D means it was used to direct unmanned reconnaissance or target drones. In Vietnam, the Air Force would fly these with these Firebee drones, reconnaissance drones under the wing. They'd start them up, launch them off, and remotely fly them up over targets to take pictures, and then bring them back out over the water where they'd shut the engine down, deploy a parachute. Little thing would come down in its parachute, and along would come a helicopter with a hook out the back end and grab the parachute, and that's how they got them back to recover the film and refurbish them. Navy used them mainly for target drones. But all the men and women who fly it and work on it call it the Viper. This was an air defense version. You can see those little antennas up in front of the cockpit. Big intake, feed air to the engines, 3 fuel tanks, missiles on the wingtip. Very popular airplane, still in production today. Used to train navigators. Guess what the nickname is? The Gator, huh? For training navigators. They could train 12 navigators at one time in this big airplane for all, to actually get some air practice using the instruments. This is a British-designed twin-engine tactical bomber built in this country under license by Martin. Used it in Vietnam at night to bomb the supply trails. Had an interesting rotary bomb bay that could hold 750-pound GP bombs on it. The Air Defense Command would take these, put a little orange on the tails and the nose, and put pods under the wings that would simulate Soviet bomber jamming of the interceptor pilot's radar. So it gave them some real hands-on experience on how to overcome jamming of their radar and still make the intercept. Airplane on the right is the EC-135. Now this was had a very interesting mission.